I live for people explaining how they approach analysis and critique. I desperately want to know how other people think about things so I can learn to think in new ways. I want a compelling intellectual or journalistic project, but I also want to know how it was conceived and executed. For example, Verge reporter Mia Sato made a TikTok last year explaining one of her marquee articles all about luxury product dupes. In this TikTok, she explained how she connected the flood of copycat versions of a particular athleisure designer's skirt to online content trends and developments in intellectual property litigation.
I have been very interested in how we talk about dupes online and how we litigate them on social media, because typically the discussion ends up being who is in the right and who is in the wrong. Do poor people deserve nice things or do they not? Is this design creative enough to be protected under law? And I've noticed that we never really get to satisfactory answers. So I wanted to approach this question a little bit differently.
Sato's writing and analysis are so smart and yet so wildly shareable. Two qualities that rarely come together in today's media ecosystem. So insights on her process? Yes, please. Now, call me extremely biased, but I believe that analysis and critique are essential skills in the 21st century economy. I also believe that communicating our analysis and critique is crucial to building buy-in with colleagues or clients, attracting audiences for our ideas, or advancing our agendas. Now, analysis and critique are skills that resist efficiency and optimization. Thinking about and communicating the underlying causes or context of a phenomenon almost always involves fits and starts. We can't force the discovery of oblique connections between phenomena. It takes time and experimentation to find the right metaphor or framing narrative to explain those connections. Setting out to think about the world and share your findings entails making a mess. Probably a big one. I'm Tara McMullen, and this is What Works, the show that rethinks work, business, and leadership for the 21st century economy. Now, case in point, the essay I originally wanted to share with you today is still a mess. It's an analysis of the Washington Post layoffs in early February, something I've been working on since, early February. It's about how institutional infrastructure creates the necessary downtime for quality knowledge and creative production, and why all those WAPO journalists can't just turn around and go independent. It's a defense of organizations in an increasingly fractured employment or self-employment landscape, as well as a call to independent workers and business owners to think about the infrastructure that their work depends on. It asks what happens when we impose the rigidity of industrialization to the necessary porosity of knowledge and creative work. So yeah, I'm going to give myself another week to tidy up that mess. In the meantime, in the spirit of sharing the behind the scenes of the messy, critical, and analytical process I love, even when it's not loving me back, I decided to share a case study I delivered in the last session of Making Sense. In this case study, I detail how an essay I wrote last year came together, from its inciting, wait, what moment, to experimenting with different mental models, to landing on an argument and completing the piece. No matter what kind of communicator, analyst, critic, or sense maker you are, I hope you find something that makes you think a little differently the next time you have an idea to share. By the way, the next session of Making Sense starts March 24th. It's an 8-week live workshop series designed to guide you through this messy yet essential process for communication in the 21st century economy. Go to whatworks.fyi/making sense to learn more and register. That's whatworks.fyi/making sense. Oh, one more thing. In previous sessions of Making Sense, including the one that this case study is from, I referred to the wait what moment as chaos. Carl Weick, often referred to as the father of sense-making, says sense-making starts with chaos. But I found this loaded word created more confusion than understanding. So now I'm referring to this experience as the wait, what moment, which I think captures the fundamental feeling without the baggage. So every time you hear chaos as I explain this process, just think, she's talking about the wait, what moment. So this is the article that I published last week / podcast episode. It was called Drifting Toward the Status Quo. I got it right eventually. And this article went from idea to publication between October 10th and October 23rd. I had originally thought this is going to be a quickie, and then it turned into not a quickie at all. Not that 2.5 weeks is a horribly long piece of time for something to be in the works. But when I got started on it, it almost felt like I was just going to be able to bang it out in a day. That did not happen. And so welcome to my windy thought process here. So let's start with the chaos, right? I experienced chaos while listening to the October 10th episode of The Vergecast. The Vergecast is the flagship podcast of The Verge, which is a tech news, tech criticism, tech review website, part of the Vox Media Network. And I love The Verge. I love it because it is not one of the... It is not one of those radical anti-capitalist media sites that I also love, but they do think really critically about technology and the technology industry and about how technology intersects with politics. And so I find it really helpful in terms of just a completely different perspective on some of the things that I think about quite a lot, which are almost always tech adjacent, tech industry adjacent, politically adjacent. So I love this podcast. I love the people behind it. And so I was listening to this episode, and this episode was talking about OpenAI's most recent big announcements. And so this was right after their Dev Day, which is like Apple's WWDC, or I don't remember what any of the other companies call them, but all the big tech companies have these big launch events. Well, that's what Dev Day is for OpenAI. So they're talking about all of these just what I felt were like ludicrous features. Like, why do I want to use ChatGPT to search Zillow when I can search Zillow on Zillow and like use filters? Like, why is a chat interface the right thing for that? Or like, why would I want to order a hoagie through DoorDash but on ChatGPT? Like, this made no sense to me. It felt stupid. It felt not strategic. It felt like, oh gosh, this is like the worst parts of consumer capitalism all rolled up into a big artificial intelligence poop sandwich. And so that is a feeling of chaos. I was confused, I was angry, and I was like, what are these people thinking? So I kind of wanted to call out this part of the chaos specifically, because I know a couple of you have said, this chaos idea is like, it's a little weird. It's a strange word to put on this stuff. And I can see that. I will acknowledge that. So I wanted to give you an idea of like what chaos feels like for me. So in this particular situation, some of the things that were running through my head was, oh God, why do these products feel so stupid? And who wants this? Let alone needs this? Chaos. Why does a company worth $500 billion bother with this stuff when their purported vision is so much grander, right? Creating artificial general intelligence, God-level AI that's going to just change the world and make all of our lives super shiny and wonderful. Why? Why bother with making a Zillow integration, or God forbid, the Canva? Don't get me started on the Canva integration. It's just, that's a whole nother conversation. And then also, why do they keep failing at their brand promise, right? Sam Altman goes out there and he talks about how they're right on the cusp of this God level super intelligence. It's going to be here by the end of the year bullshit. And I'm like, why? Why do you keep opening your mouth and saying these things when it's not true? See how worked up I get? That's chaos. It doesn't always have to be that kind of angry and indignant. Sometimes it's more confused. Sometimes maybe it's even sad. But it's those feelings of like, why? That are often where chaos comes from. So this was some of the chaos that was rattling around in my brain as I'm listening to this, as I'm probably like running and also talking back to the podcast out loud while I'm doing these things. Chaos. All right. So I get done with my run, I take a shower, I get started on work, and I'm like, I just want to sit down and see what happens if I stream of consciousness start getting this stuff out on paper, right? Oh, before I get to there, I got ahead of myself. I wanted to point out here that the chaos that I'm describing is not necessarily, and probably isn't, top of mind to my audience. I think that my audience does not follow AI news as closely as I do. I, of course, don't follow it as closely as lots of other people, but it is something that I pay a good bit of attention to. It's something I think about a lot. And so that chaos is, that specific brand of chaos is probably more recognizable to me than it is to my audience. However, if I lay it out for them, they'll perceive the chaos easily. And also, it is related to a brand of chaos that they do experience, which in this case is sort of that feeling of getting blown off course. Like you think you're steering toward one goal, and then you look back a year later and you actually ended up planning and achieving some other goal, which may or may not have been better or worse or whatever, right? It's that feeling of getting blown off course, doing not what you thought you were going to be doing. And so that is, if not top of mind, it's something that just about every person has experienced, knows that feeling, has maybe a tiny bit of fear around that thing. And so I knew that I could tie these things together. And my goal here was to take something that was in the news and tie it to something that felt chaotic to my audience, even if that particular news item didn't feel chaotic in and of itself. So as I said, I got done listening, sat down at my computer and started to type. And so that morning, probably in an hour or two, I got out about 500, maybe 800 words or so of just what I would call raw material. No structure, no real strategy behind it. I didn't know what I was writing. I had a vague idea of where I thought I wanted to go with it, but I didn't have an argument yet. I certainly didn't have a plan for the structure yet. I just knew that my brain was doing its thing and I needed to get that going out of my fingers and onto the page. So that's where I started on that Friday morning. So this is still October 10th. Heather asked, was the vague idea very close to the end result? No. And I will take you through each of the steps of how the vague idea evolved into what actually got published. So while I was writing that 800 words or so immediately after listening to the podcast episode, what I thought I was going to be writing about was sort of a systems thinking piece around looking at the whole system to better understand what problems you actually want to solve or what problems need solving, right? And so my sort of thesis there was going to be that, like, look at these fools at OpenAI solving problems that people don't have, because the only thing they can think to do with their venture capital is to steer it into banal consumer capitalism, right? Or making convenient consumption even more convenient. So that's where I thought that I was going. And some of that language made it into the final piece, but that framing absolutely did not. So on the invisible information side of things, one thing that I'm always doing when I'm thinking through something that seems chaotic to me is that I assume it makes sense to the person creating the chaos, or to the group creating the chaos, or to the phenomenon that's creating the chaos. I assume it makes sense to them. I assume that there is some sort of logic or underlying thinking, underlying idea, mental model that makes it make sense to them. And then I try and figure out, okay, well, what is that mental model? What is that system of beliefs that is making that make sense to them? Why does it make sense to the OpenAI team to roll out this app integration thing within ChatGPT? And there's multiple answers to that question. Getting investors excited about the billions of dollars that they've poured into the company is one. Another is they've been talking about agentic AI for a year now and have made very little progress on it, at least in the consumer sphere. And so this is a step in that direction, or it's something that at least plausibly looks like agentic AI. So I'm kind of looking for those things because that's often something that I can latch on to make sense of the thing for myself. And then on the other hand, I also am always thinking about, well, what do I know that allows me to make sense of this from the outside? So even if I assume there's a good faith effort of strategy or logic or thinking behind the thing that I find chaotic, what do I bring to the table in making sense of this? What is it that I know? What are my beliefs, my mental models, my logical thinking that can help me analyze what I'm seeing and share it with other people? So I'm always looking at both of those things, or I shouldn't say always because I'm not entirely sure that's true, but almost always at least. I'm thinking about both sides of that equation. So to me, that's invisible information on both sides. Okay, so again, this is all happening on the very same day that I listened to the podcast episode. Then I actually took a break that weekend. I don't remember why. Normally, I write through the weekend. I didn't this time, or I didn't do much anyway. But when I came back, I had thought about the piece a lot. And I was like, I don't know that that initial framing is going to be the right thing. And I was also thinking about okay, I think about AI a lot. I think that my audience thinks about AI tangentially, maybe quite a bit. But also, I feel like I've written a lot about AI in the last couple of years. It's not always a big hit with my audience. Sometimes it is. But I was trying to think, how can I make this as helpful and relevant and recognizable to my audience as possible? And so I started thinking about how one of the things that the reporters had talked about on the Vergecast was how OpenAI seems to have this throwing spaghetti at the wall kind of strategy for their company right now. We have no idea what people are going to do with this stuff. We have no idea what people are going to want from AI. Let's try all of it and see what sticks and also what makes money, right? Well, that's not a strategy. And so when I came back to it, I thought, all right, there is strategic vision missing in this organization, or at least nobody is owning that strategic vision if they have one. They have a mission and they have an idea of where they want to go with that. They have a vision for what AI can be in the future, but they don't have a filter, a set of, sort of a formula for decision making. They don't have strategic decisions in place to help them say, let's focus on this project and we'll back burner everything else, right? That seems to be missing. And understandably so, right? This is pretty common in early venture-backed companies, not all of them, but many. And especially when they have as much money as they do, they don't have to be as strategic or That's the impression that they have anyway. That's an old trend in Silicon Valley. So then I started thinking about, okay, well, missing strategy and what strategy really is and how it benefits a business owner is definitely a problem that my audience has. And that's true whether they're actually business owners or whether they're leaders of teams, working in teams. There's a way for people to latch on to this idea of strategy from whatever position they're coming to my newsletter from. So that's why I started thinking about strategy. And to illustrate that, metaphorically, not literally, I was thinking about a mental model from Nilofer Merchant's book, The New How. She talks about the air sandwich, where you've got lots of sound good, feel good mission and vision stuff at the top of the organization. You have the day-to-day execution stuff, but you have no meaty strategic filling in the middle. It's a sandwich of air. And she talks about how that creates problems. I'm going to avoid going into the details of that right now because I could talk to you for 90 minutes about this particular problem. We've got other stuff to cover, but that's where I thought I was going next. So I went from thinking about finding the right problem to solve to having a missing strategy. And that was on October 13th. Yeah, so the argument was going to be, hey, this is what happens when you don't have a clear strategy. Here's some ways to start thinking about what your strategy might be. So I spent most of that week on that argument. I would say the piece got about 70% of the way there, but I could tell that there were still too many strands of ideas. It wasn't that that framing was wrong. That framing is still correct. Just like the finding the right problem framing could still be correct. The problem was I had like 5 angles, 5 frames I could have used, and I kept trying to include all of them instead of picking one, which is ironic because the frame here is my strategy. Anyhow, so I kept trying to weave in all of these other framings, these other arguments, and the piece just kept getting away from me. So when I feel that start happening, that's when I get out the pencil and paper or the pen and paper, and I start just kind of jotting down what those big ideas are, what the beats are. Something that I asked you to do last week. What is my argument? How am I supporting that argument, right? And I try and do it from memory, right? So at this point, I've written 2,500 words, 3,000 words, but I have an idea of what I've said, even if I don't have it, even if it's not right. And so I'm jotting down, like, what would make this make sense? What's the order of these things? What's important? What's not? And then I started thinking again about my audience. What are they going to recognize most easily? And so from there, I thought, okay, well, maybe this strategy thing also plays into this idea of if you work hard, you can do anything, or if you work hard, you can succeed, right? This has been top of mind only because my kids' like senior games for everything has been coming up. And I've heard high school seniors say that as their advice to underclassmen during their big celebration things. And I'm like, oh, please, like, please don't believe that. That's not true. Anyhow, so I was thinking, okay, well, if that's the thing that is missing here, if that's a piece of invisible information that a lot of people are actually still operating with, this idea that, well, if I just work really hard at this, I can do anything. I can succeed. I can hit this goal. If I think about why that's not true, there's a version of that I can call strategy, because you can't just work hard at anything. You can't work hard at everything. There has to be a strategy. You have to know what you want to work hard on and what you don't want to work hard on, or what you need to work hard on and what you don't need to work hard on. Otherwise, you'll burn out. So I started reframing the piece around that idea, and I got that to a finished draft. So we'll say I got it 100% of the way there. I recorded it. and slept on it and thought, I don't like this. This is not right. I don't like this. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Or it made sense. Maybe it would have been fine, but I didn't like it. It still wasn't where I wanted it to be. So I gave it another weekend. Again, didn't write through this weekend. I think I was doing something else. Maybe it was probably kid related. So I gave it the weekend and came back to it fresh. And when I came back to it fresh, I mean, I opened a new tab in the document that I was working in and started writing from scratch. So instead of trying to take the 2,500 words that I'd finished with the previous week, I kind of recentered, had thought a lot about the argument that I wanted to make around the mental model that I wanted to use as sort of the way I wanted to talk about this stuff. Again, wrote it out, paper and pen, in terms of like, these are the big beats that I want to hit. And then just started writing again. Part of the problem earlier is that I had written some sentences that I really, really liked, and I kept trying to use them instead of letting myself write a piece that made sense, or that I think made sense, and then seeing if those sentences worked in that piece. And so by starting from scratch with a fresh argument, a fresh mental model to work from, I was able to detach myself from those sentences that I really liked and then make it make sense to me, and then go back and see, okay, can I still use this sentence? Can I still use this sentence? Can I still use this sentence? Sarah says, this is so relatable. I'm both glad and very sorry. It's relatable. So in this in this completely new draft of this piece, I used a new mental model, totally got rid of the air sandwich idea, didn't talk about strategy at all, and started talking about instead a system archetype called the drift to low performance. But I took it another step and said, really, this is a drift toward the status quo. The status quo is always pulling us back. Even a giant, well-funded company like OpenAI on the cutting edge of technological innovation is going to be pulled back by the status quo. It is such a heavy, heavy weight around all of us. And so we have to be really intentional and cautious about letting it go and not getting pulled back in. So that was how then I reframed the piece. So that was October 20th to 22nd, finished the draft, recorded it, edited it, sent it out on the 23rd. And that is the windy story of a post that was not one of my favorites from the year, but I think I said something worth saying, and I was glad that I got it out. There's a link in the show notes to Drifting Towards the Status Quo if you want to see how the final version turned out. As I said, it wasn't my favorite piece from last year, but I was satisfied with how it turned out given its messy origin story. If you want to get in on this process and case studies like these, join me for Making Sense. The first of 8 live sessions is Tuesday, March 24th. I'll guide you through turning your audience's wait, what? moments into compelling content that helps others make sense of our complex world. Get all the details at whatworks.fyi/making sense.